Almost no project ends looking exactly like the plan it started from. You set out with a clear idea of what you are going to do, and then reality arrives and things turn out harder or easier than expected. A better path reveals itself, a supplier falls through, or what you learn along the way quietly reshapes what the project should even be. On an ordinary project, you would just adapt and move on. But when support is attached, that instinct to quietly adjust runs into something important, because the project you are delivering was described in advance, and changing it midway is not simply a matter of doing what seems best. It has to be handled with care and in the open. So, in the next few minutes, we are going to look at how to change course mid-project without creating a problem for yourself. One note before we begin, this channel is educational only. We are not a government agency. We are not affiliated with or endorsed by Go Business, Enterprise Singapore, or any government body, and nothing here is official advice. We name no schemes, no criteria, and no figures, because those change over time, so we will always point you back to the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, to confirm what actually applies to your situation before you rely on any of it. Projects never go exactly to plan. The first thing to make peace with is that a project drifting from its original plan is normal, not a failure, and treating it as a failure is where a lot of avoidable panic comes from. Plans are made with the knowledge you had at the start, and the whole process of doing the work teaches you things you could not have known then. So, of course, the plan and the reality diverge. That divergence is not a sign you planned badly. It is a sign the project is alive and you are paying attention. The mistake is not that things changed. The mistake is only ever in how you respond to the change. Admit openly and thoughtfully, a shift in scope is just part of running a real project. Hidden, denied, or acted on unilaterally, the same shift can turn into a genuine problem. So drop the idea that a good project is one that never changes, and pick up the more useful idea that a good project is one that changes well. The theory. The earlier you notice that your project is moving away from its plan, the more gracefully you can handle it. So build the habit of watching for drift rather than waking up to it late. Scope rarely changes in one dramatic moment. More often it slides, a small deviation here, a quiet substitution there, each one reasonable on its own, until one day the project you are actually running is noticeably different from the one you described, and you are not quite sure when that happened. Catching this early keeps you in control. You can pause, look at the gap between plan and reality, and decide what to do while the change is still small and manageable. Catching it late means confronting a large accumulated divergence all at once, often near the end when your options are fewest. So check in with yourself regularly. Is what we are doing still what we said we would do? And treat any honest no as information to act on now rather than later. Separate a real change from a wobble. Not every deviation deserves a formal response, and part of handling scope changes well is telling the difference between a genuine change of scope and an ordinary wobble along the way. Projects breathe. Small adjustments in timing, method, or detail are the normal texture of doing real work, and treating every minor variation as a major event would be exhausting and unnecessary. What matters is when a change touches the substance of what the project is, its purpose, its shape, the outcome it was meant to produce, or the terms it was accepted on. That is a real change of scope, and it calls for care. The everyday flexing within the plan does not. Learning to feel this line saves you from both errors, the paranoia that escalates every ripple into a crisis, and the complacency that lets a serious redefinition slip by unremarked. Ask whether the change alters what the project fundamentally is, and let that question sort the wobbles from the ones that matter. Tell someone before you act, not after. When a change is real, the single most important principle is to raise it before you act on it, not to make the change quietly and explain it later if anyone asks. This is the difference between a project that adapts properly and one that quietly becomes something other than what was agreed. Support is given on the basis of a described project, and altering that project in substance without a word turns a reasonable adaptation into a departure from what you committed to, however good your reasons. Flagging the change first keeps everything honest and usually keeps everything fine because most changes handled openly are perfectly acceptable. It is the silence that causes trouble, not the change. So the moment you recognize a real shift in scope, the instinct to cultivate is to surface it early through the proper channel. Describe what is changing and why, and let the change be acknowledged before it happens rather than discovered after. Keep the outcome, adjust the path. A useful way to think about changing scope well is to hold the outcome steady while you adjust the path toward it, rather than quietly changing the destination itself. Often a change is forced on the how. A method stops working, a route closes, a better approach appears, while the what, the actual result the project was meant to deliver, can stay exactly the same. Changes of that kind, where you find a different way to reach the same agreed outcome, are the easiest to handle and the least likely to cause difficulty, because the thing that was supported is still the thing you are delivering. It becomes far more delicate when the outcome itself starts to move, when the project quietly redefines what it is trying to achieve. So, when a change presses on you, ask first whether you can absorb it in the path while protecting the outcome, and reach for changing the destination only when the path genuinely cannot bend far enough. Watch the line between flexing and redefining. There is a line every changing project walks between flexing within its original intent and redefining itself into a different project altogether. And staying on the right side of it is much of the art. Flexing is adjusting the details while remaining recognizably the project that was described, and it is normal and healthy. Redefining is when accumulated changes add up to something that would not be recognizable as the original. A different aim, a different shape, a different thing wearing the old name. The danger is that redefinition rarely announces itself. It arrives as a series of individually sensible flexes, none alarming alone, that together carry the project somewhere it was never meant to go. So keep asking not just, is this change reasonable, but would the project I am now running still be recognizable as the one I set out to do? If the honest answer is drifting toward no, you are no longer flexing, and it is time to handle the change formally. Document the change as it happens. Whenever scope genuinely changes, write down what changed, when, and why at the time it happens, rather than trying to reconstruct it later from memory. This is not bureaucracy for its own sake, it is protection and clarity. A project that changes without a record becomes hard to explain to others and eventually to yourself, because the reasoning that felt obvious in the moment fades, and all that remains is a gap between what you said you would do and what you did, with nothing to bridge it. A simple contemporaneous note, this changed, here is why, here is what we did about it, keeps the story of the project coherent and defensible. It turns a potentially awkward divergence into a clearly reasoned sequence of decisions. Good records are what let an honest change stay honest looking in hindsight. So build the small habit of noting changes as they occur, while the reasons are fresh and complete. Do not let a change become an excuse. A shift in scope can be genuine and necessary, and it can also become a convenient cover for a project that is simply going wrong, and you owe it to yourself to know which is happening. It is uncomfortably easy to reframe a struggling project as a changing one, to describe missed goals as evolved goals, and quietly move the target to wherever the arrow happened to land. That may soothe the discomfort in the moment, but it corrodes something important, your own honest grip on how the project is actually doing. So when you find yourself changing scope, check your motive. Are you adapting to something real that the work revealed? Or are you redefining success downward to avoid admitting a shortfall? The first is good project management. The second is a slow way of losing the plot. Keep the two clearly apart, and be willing to name a problem as a problem rather than dressing it up as a change of direction. Weigh whether to change or to pause. Sometimes the right response to a serious change is not to change the project at all, but to pause and reconsider whether it should continue in its current form. And that option deserves a place on the table. When circumstances shift enough that the original project no longer makes sense, pressing on with a hasty redefinition can be worse than stopping to think. A deliberate pause, done openly and in good communication with whoever is involved, lets you take stock properly rather than improvising a new project on the fly under pressure. This is not the same as abandoning the work. It is refusing to let momentum carry you into a poorly considered change simply because stopping feels like failure. So when a big change looms, hold two options in view. Adapt the project thoughtfully or pause and reassess, and choose between them deliberately rather than defaulting to whichever keeps things moving. Sometimes the strongest move is to slow down before you decide. Underneath every technique for handling scope changes sits one thing that matters more than any of them, which is good faith, the genuine intention to deliver honestly what you set out to deliver, adjusted openly as reality requires. If that intention is real and visible in how you communicate, most changes look exactly like what they are: a business doing its honest best as conditions shift. If it is absent, no amount of careful process will disguise a project that quietly became something other than what was supported. So the deepest advice about changing scope is not procedural at all. It is to stay genuinely committed to the spirit of what you agreed, to raise changes because you want the project to remain honest rather than to cover yourself, and to let that good faith guide every judgment call the rest of this cannot fully specify. Handle changes as someone who wants to get it right, and the specifics tend to fall into place. Confirm what the change requires at the source. Exactly what you are expected to do when scope changes, how changes are supposed to be raised, and what is or is not permitted vary with the particular support and shift over time. So treat everything here as the shape of good practice rather than as the specific rules for your situation. The right way to notify a change, the point at which a change needs formal agreement, and what happens if a project ends up different from what was described are all matters of current detail, and current detail is what we deliberately avoid naming, because it changes. When your own project starts to move, the place to confirm what is actually required of you is the official source, gobusiness.gov.sg, together with whatever channel is tied to your particular support. Use this video for the instincts. Notice early, raise before you act, keep good faith, and use the official source for the concrete procedure that applies to you right now. The instincts hold across cases. The procedures you must confirm where they live. A closing thought. So here is what to carry away about changing course mid-project. A project drifting from its plan is normal, not a failure, so notice the drift early and separate a real change of scope from an ordinary wobble. When a change is real, raise it before you act on it rather than explaining it later, and try to keep the agreed outcome steady while adjusting only the path toward it. Watch the line between flexing within your intent and quietly redefining the project into something else. Document changes as they happen, and never let a change become a cover for a project that is simply going wrong. Weigh whether to change or to pause when the shift is large. Keep good faith at the center of all of it, and confirm what a change actually requires at the source. Remember too that everything here is general and educational. We are not a government agency, and we are not affiliated with or endorsed by anyone, and we name no schemes because they change. If this made a changing project feel manageable rather than frightening, subscribe for more plain English Singapore Grant explainers, and we will keep helping you steer honestly through whatever the work reveals, one open decision at a time.